famoso. What would happen if you took a cold shower every single day for 30 days? Cold showers are everywhere right now. Top athletes, celebrities, biohackers, everyone swears by cold exposure. But does it actually work? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the real science behind cold showers. And I'll also reveal what actually happened to my body after following a 30-day cold protocol. By the end of this video, you'll know what benefits you can realistically expect, how cold the water really needs to be, whether cold showers help with fat loss or muscle growth, and the side effects most people never talk about. Let's start with what happens from day one. Day one is the hardest, but it's also the most rewarding. When you expose your body to cold, it triggers the release of three key hormones: norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine. Together, these activate your sympathetic nervous system, also known as your fight or flight response. That's the reason you panic, gasp for air, or feel like you need to escape the moment cold water hits your skin. But here's the powerful part. Cold exposure doesn't just spike these hormones during the shower, it keeps them elevated for 30 minutes to several hours afterward. This leads to improved mood, higher energy, and sharper focus. Very similar to how you feel after a workout, or even after drinking coffee. In fact, coffee works in a similar way, which is why many people find they don't even need caffeine when they start their day with cold exposure. But to get these benefits, there are a few things you need to know. First, the water has to be cold enough. One study compared cold water immersion at 90 degrees Eper, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Only the 60 degrees Fahrenheit group showed a significant increase in dopamine and norepinephrine. For reference, when I measured my coldest shower setting, it came in at around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and yes, I live in Canada, so the water is colder here. No thermometer? No problem. Research suggests the water is cold enough if it triggers what's called the initial inspiratory gasp, that sharp, involuntary breath you take the moment the cold hits. Now, here's where most people get discouraged. In some studies, subjects sat in cold water for up to an hour. And let's be honest, nobody is taking hour-long cold showers every day. The good news? Several studies show benefits with exposures as short as 20 to 30 seconds. Even if the hormonal increase isn't massive by research standards, you'll almost certainly feel a noticeable boost in mood and alertness. Have you ever noticed how different you feel after a cold shower? So we've covered the mental benefits, but what about fat loss? You've probably heard this before. Cold exposure boosts your metabolism because your body has to work harder to stay warm. More calories burned, more fat loss. Sounds great, right? Most research shows that cold exposure can increase your metabolic rate by about 15%. But then a 2021 study took things much further. In well-trained athletes, cold water immersion increased calorie burning by up to 50%. That pushed their estimated daily calorie expenditure from around 2% caloriesto, nearly 3,000 calories per day. On paper, that sounds insane, since 1 pound of fat equals roughly 3,500 calories. This would theoretically mean losing a pound of fat every 3 days. But before you start planning your move to Antarctica, there are two major problems with this idea. In that study, participants were immersed in cold water for over 3 hours. The average shower lasts about 8 minutes, and your actual cold exposure would be only a fraction of that. Researchers measured calorie burn while subjects were in the cold, then used that number to estimate calorie burn over a full 24 hours. That assumes metabolism stays elevated all day, which is extremely unlikely. Even if you crunch the numbers very optimistically, cold showers alone won't create a meaningful fat loss effect, unless you were literally sitting in cold water all day, every day. Now, there was a study published just this year that made me pause. Participants followed a weekly protocol of cold showers at 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, plus 1 2-minute cold water immersion up to the neck. After each session, they let their bodies warm up naturally for 10 minutes. After 8 weeks, the men in the study lost just over 1 centimeter from their waist end, showed a reduction in visceral belly fat. The women, however, saw no significant changes. Sounds promising, but once I dug deeper, serious issues started to appear. The researchers only reported results from the cold exposure group. To know whether the cold actually caused the changes, you must compare it to a control group. They had one, but for reasons that make no sense, they didn't properly report or emphasize that comparison. When you actually compare both groups, there was no significant difference between them. This was just one of several major flaws in the paper, which makes it hard to feel confident about the findings. Cold showers are not a reliable fat loss tool. If your goal is fat loss, nothing beats a well-designed nutrition and training plan built on proven science. That's what actually moves the needle. So we've talked about mental benefits, and we've talked about fat loss. Now let's talk about muscle recovery and growth, because this is where things get really interesting. Ice baths have been used for decades by elite athletes, and for good reason. Multiple studies show that cold water immersion can reduce muscle soreness, decrease fatigue, and lower inflammation after training. This makes cold exposure incredibly useful for athletes who need to recover quickly between competitions or events. But here's the problem. If your goal is building muscle and strength, that same benefit can actually work against you. After a workout, your muscles become temporarily damaged and inflamed. That inflammation isn't bad, it's a signal. It tells your body to adapt, repair, and come back bigger and stronger. Taking ice baths immediately after training can blunt this signal by reducing inflammation too much, too soon. And this isn't just theory. 3 separate studies have now shown that post-workout cold water immersion can significantly reduce muscle growth over time. If you want to maximize strength and hypertrophy, avoid ice baths immediately after training. Use cold exposure before workouts, at least 4 to 6 hours after training, or on a completely separate day. Personally, I do my cold exposure on rest days or several hours after heavy leg sessions, so I get the recovery benefits without sacrificing gain. It's important to make one distinction here. The studies showing reduced muscle growth used ice baths, with subjects immersed for 10 to 20 minutes. Those are very aggressive protocols. Based on that, it's reasonable to assume that a quick cold shower after a workout probably won't hurt muscle growth, but also won't do much for recovery either. So while it's not something to stress about, it may simply not be worth the potential downside. There's one more benefit of cold exposure that doesn't get talked about enough. And it's actually the main reason I personally keep cold showers in my routine. Mental resilience, forcing yourself to remain calm while your body is screaming to escape, one of the most powerful ways to train your mind. Cold exposure activates areas of the brain that suppress impulsivity. This helps you stay calm under stress, react instead of overreact, and build resilience and mental toughness. And this carries over into everything else you do. During a brutal leg workout, for example, I use the same mindset I use in the cold. I stop labeling the pain as bad and start seeing it as a temporary sensation that I can control. If you want to try this safely, here's what I recommend. Start with cold showers. Work your way up to 30 seconds to 1 minute. Over time, stay in longer or make the water colder. If you want to take it further, cold tub can provide benefits that showers simply can't. Cold exposure won't magically burn fat, but it will improve mood, focus, recovery, and most importantly, mental resilience. If fat loss is your main goal, click here for my video on what I believe is the most underrated exercise you can start doing today to lose fat faster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.